Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Building Bridges, Not Walls. I'm your host, Hifza Pervez, and today we are opening the door to a topic that often feels really heavy, but it's extremely important to talk about, and which is going to be grief. Grief, one of the most profound human emotion that we experience off and on. It's very raw, very consuming, and deeply personal. Whenever we lose someone or even something that we hold dear, it can leave us in pain that we usually cannot quite describe in words. But on the other hand, it's also universal. We will face in one form or the other, yet very few of us truly actually understand that how grief works, how to live with it. So that's why we are going to have this conversation. It's going to be about understanding the grief, and not just as just a painful emotion. We are going to talk about it as a process, as a journey, because to be very honest, grief at the end of the day, it reshapes us. It redefines us. So, we are going to explore how to cope up, how to heal, how to eventually find a way to move forward while still honoring what we have lost. So, if you have ever felt like your grief was too much to bear, or if you have struggled or to support someone in their grief, or if simply you're just curious to know how to better understand the process of grief, how to understand this human emotion, I'm inviting you to join us into this conversation today. I'm personally joined by very incredible experts in grief counseling. They have guided countless of people through their unique journeys of loss, offering not just understanding, but also the practical knowledge and practical tools to cope and find hope on the other side of the pain. Firstly, we do have Dr. Bilal, which is not only a creative person, but also a very passionate advocate for building up these kind of meaningful conversation about mental health and emotional well-being. But Hina Rizwan is joining us today as well, a highly accomplished clinical psychologist and trauma informed therapist. Hina has specialized in trauma work with advanced training from Arizona Trauma Institute, US, and certification in CBT and DBT. She also holds a master's in clinical psychology, and she is a very proud member of American Psychological Association and Australian and New Zealand Mental Health Association. Her expertise spans variety of things from grief to anxiety to trauma to depression and much more. And she is also the founder of Therapy Beans, which is an online platform for personalized therapy session. So, to be very honest, it's a privilege to have you both today on the same platform discussing such an important topic. Welcome to the conversation, Dr. Bilal and Dr. Hina. How are you two doing today?
Thank you so much for introducing Hafsa. I'm good. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing a good and looking forward to have nobody talks about grief as a process. So yeah, looking forward to that. How are you, Dr. Bilal?
She's a wonderful friend, wonderful colleague, both in life and career-wise as well. I'm just glad that she could take time out from her very busy schedule and just be with us today. We've had so many conversations, clinically and otherwise, about grief, its misunderstanding. It just made sense to have this conversation as quickly as we could. So again, thank you so much, Hina, for your time. It's super duper
Thank you
appreciated.
so much for asking me and having me here. It's a pleasure as well.
Okay, so I'm gonna get into it and grief. The word grief itself, I don't think we do understand. I don't think even we understand while we are having the process or while we are in a grieving period. So, what is grief? What are different types of griefs, and is there any difference? Obviously, there would be a difference between sadness, depression, and grief. How do we analyze the situation of the process of grief?
Um, so, you know what? I'll open it up on a very um,
Sorry to cut you off. A little, I think there is a little bit of voice problem from your side, Dr. Bilal.
okay. Okay, hold on. How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's better. Thank you so
There
much.
we go.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
So the way I often explain it to my clients is in a very, very, very basic way. It's the trauma associated with emotional loss, grief. That's how I define it to them. There are types of grief as well, and there's sort of classes of grief as well. But obviously that's different. But essentially, it's all about loss.
Mm.
It's all about loss, right? And I think it's super important to understand that it's not just death. Many people think grief is death. No, grief is also just losing something abstract as well. Statistically speaking, grief typically is shown the most in people who lose someone in their life physically, like death. But the second highest provocator of of grief, is relationship failure, divorce, or breakup, which is an abstract loss, but it provokes the same feeling of loss of death,
Yeah.
right? I'm sure Hina obviously has her views on this to contribute as well.
Yeah, and just like you put it up, that grief is associated with loss. I would also add that we confuse that grief and loss are essentially the same things. But grief is actually a reaction to that loss you're experiencing. That loss can either be a physical loss, it can be a psychosocial loss, or it can be a secondary loss. It can be a reaction to something that you have experienced, but you don't have an emotional outlet to it. So, grief is basically a reaction to different kinds of loss that you experience that can be abstract, like Dr. Bilal said, and that can be also tangible. You can feel it, you can touch it, and then you can also, it can also be non tangible situations as well.
Okay, so as a person who might be going through it, or as a person who might be observing someone else goes through it, is there any difference to categorize if a person is just sad, depressed, or actually going through a very strong period of grief? Like with the death, I understand when someone dies, your closed one can actually say it out loud that you are grieving a person, you're mourning a loss. But how do we define or categorize the three things from each other?
Okay. So, for example, the biggest, or rather the clearest definition you can have to know if you're going through grief is that where you have what is called the impact event, where these feelings of loss, of alienation, of confusion are all stemming from one particular identifiable event, right? There's no such thing as generalized grief. There's no such thing as that. For example, something which people misunderstand, losing a family member yes, it will provoke grief. However, many people misunderstand that losing a pet can provoke exactly the same feeling. But there's this narrative around that, oh, it's just an animal.
Yeah.
No. A good example of this would be students when they fail to get into their dream university, they will go through grief.
Yeah.
They will feel that loss. Or, for example, let's take something which, in the grand scheme of things might not be considered a big deal. Maybe you don't get your driver's license on your first attempt. You absolutely can go through grief for that. You were staking so much on it and you didn't make it. Of course you can feel that. Any kind of loss. Soldiers go through it when they lose a limb,
Yeah.
or when they lose an arm or a leg in a war zone and they come back and they're on death duty, they go through grief. Because remember one thing, loss does not mean it has to be tangible. Even a loss of identity, refugees from any country, the loss of their homeland. All of this is very important. It's and obviously, Hina understands this on a greater level because her trauma work, I think, would give much greater insight. I think so. Please take this.
Yeah, so I was going to add that when we say how do we distinguish between grief, depression, and then the association with loss, one thing that Dr. Bilal also pointed out was see the reactions out of it. If it's impacting different domains of your life, for instance, you were working or performing better, but eventually your performance dropped, and then you started having those thoughts back that what would happen if they were there? What would happen if that event was still in my life? That is the first indication of that something is pointing towards I am suppressing something, or maybe I'm not dealing with something that is giving me solid reactions, or maybe symptoms, or it's showing its own impact, and I need to consider it. One identification is this, and the second thing is we generally tend to confuse between depression as exactly the same feelings with grief, but sometimes depression के जो symptoms होते हैं, those are more different, और उसके अंदर एक बहुत prominent component होता है of hopelessness. And that usually distinguish depression versus the grief. Grief, जैसे डॉक्टर बिलाल ने कहा, can be as simple as, loss of your identity, loss of not getting that first driver's license. It does not make one hopeless, but it does make one feel miss that element more than any other disorder or any other, diagnosis would generally let that person feel.
Right. Okay. So when we talk about grief, it varies because I have seen personally people dealing with grief differently. Sometimes when they are in delusion, when they don't even want to accept that they are grieving someone or something, they'll be acting differently. But is there any right way of going through the grief period? Is it just is it a personal journey and it differs from person to person? What's the right way of dealing with your grief, whatever reason?
Okay, so before I answer that, there's something else which you touched on, which I think is important to highlight. There are types of grief, like I said at the start. The one
Oh
that
yeah.
you're describing right now, where a person might not show it, that's called absent grief. Absent grief
Okay.
is basically where they will outwardly not show it, but internally they're going through a lot of complex feelings. They might not show it. There's a loss of who am I, what is my role, etc. So in no particular order, like I think there's five of them. The first one is anticipatory grief, which is basically where you're waiting for that impact event. So very typical with someone who has terminal illness, cancer, or some kind of neurodegenerative disease. You're waiting for that to happen. Tremendously painful, but there we go. There's what do you call absent grief? The one where they don't show it outwardly. There's something which is called somatic grief,
Okay.
right? Which is one of the worst ones. Why?
Yeah.
Mainly because the grief actively causes more distress in your daily functioning on top of the impact event, right? There is what's it called? Cumulative grief. Yeah, that's the one. Cumulative grief is the one where you experience one grief on top of another, on top of another, on top of another. What is happening right now in Gaza? I mean, you're losing brothers and sisters and children and husbands and wives, one after the other. If one person, they will go through multiple events. And for just to get this on the record, each event has to be treated individually. You cannot treat it as a group thing.
I was about to ask this because I think that is the maximum level of trauma that you can experience, that they are experiencing. Is it possible to come out of it any time?
I mean, yes, but also depends on the person. Again, I will defer to Hina on this one because her trauma work would give her much more insightful answer.
So
Dr.
when you
Hina.
say that, can someone come out of that grief element or heal from grief? I would say the first thing is awareness into what's actually happening. The more the person is aware of, yes, this is an event, उसकी acknowledgement बहुत important होती है in the process of starting to actually feel what's happening. If someone just keeps denying the fact that this event happened, they start suppressing it, then eventually होगा ये that their body will not come to terms with that event, and eventually they'll start lagging behind. They'll feel like everything is perfect, nothing is happening, and at the end of the day they'll eventually fall back into that shutdown phase where they'll stop feeling or start having that disconnect from environment, from themselves, from even that whole event. And then जो narrative हमारे brain में तब चल रहा होता है, that's mostly associated with how life was good with them versus what good things they taught to us, right? And then eventually the person who can heal is unable to heal because they're not aware or they're not acknowledging the fact that yes, that event happened, and these are the emotions associated with that event that I am currently feeling, but I'm denying them.
Right. I think every one of us must have seen such people that they would be in a denial and shutdown phase. They don't want to deal with the loss that they have gone through, whether it's an object or a person or a situation.
The funny thing is that, contrary to yes, you're right, there have been incidents like that. But many times, and I think Hina's also experienced this herself, is that sometimes someone will come to us and they'll say, oh, we're depressed. And we sit there and we're just like, you're not depressed, you're going through grief. And they just look at you like you're speaking Greek. They're like, what do you mean I'm going through grief? No one died.
Yeah.
And it's just, and then you have to sit down and explain it to them. And then there's this transition from relief to concern, where they're relieved it's not depression, because obviously
Yeah.
depression is very scary. And
But
then they're
it's
just like, wait,
diagnosed kind of, yes.
they're
Yeah.
just like, wait, how am I supposed to deal with this? Because no one's ever told me this is even possible.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm going through grief that I didn't get my dream job. What? But I've been working for 20 years. What are you
Hmm.
talking about? You see, and um, the thing is that sometimes you have to cue them into recognizing it, because they don't know what it even is. Because
Yeah.
again, at least again in the South Asian lens, death is considered the only grief that is
Yeah,
worth discussing. And
yeah.
even that is
Even
not
then.
really discussed in a healthy fashion. It's
Yes.
not.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I mean, notwithstanding the religious and social components, I have had so many people just come up to me and ask me, why do you talk so much about this? This is depressing. To which I was like, why is this depressing? Grief is the one thing that does not discriminate.
Hmm.
It doesn't care if you're rich or old or poor or infirm.
Hmm.
It doesn't care.
Hmm.
You will experience it.
Hmm.
So why not be prepared for it? But again, I mean, yeah, grief is considered very depressing as a subject
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
mortality.
one
So yeah.
thing that I would add as well, when like हमारे South Asian lens के अंदर एक चीज common ये होती है that we look for diagnosis more than actual what's happening.
Mhm.
Yeah.
जितने भी लोग इस फील्ड के अंदर प्रैक्टिस करें, they're more concerned with what disorder, what diagnosis should we give to this client, and the client themselves ask, अच्छा, what is my disorder? Like, which category do I lie? So when they hear that this is nothing, this is just an even its impact, and this is something you're grieving or you're going through it, वो जो off guard वाली उनकी
Hmm.
expression होता है that no, this is like you are lying, this is not, this
Hmm.
can't be possible, right?
Hmm.
There should be something that I need to get on the paper so that I can tell that this is something I'm categorized for now.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is where the misconception of whole this field lies as well, that we are more focused on diagnosing versus actually sitting with the clients or actually feeling them or letting them acknowledge what's happening in their lives.
Hmm. I think grief, when it comes to grief, a lot of people do not know how to process it, let's say, because of the unawareness again. But grief is something that is unanimous. Every person, one way or the other, goes through this period, sometimes small, sometimes big. So I'll come back to the same question. Is there any right way of dealing with your grief, or is it going to be a variable thing and it will differ from a person to person or a case to case?
Uh, oh dear. Okay, so the thing is that this is a bit of a hot topic among grief therapists, mostly because one, grief has now been admitted as a classification of illness in the DSM, which is the Manual of Mental Illness, right? And it was, I think, at the start of 24, it was added in as a pathologized sort of process, which
Hmm.
a lot of us were against, because grief is extremely personal. There's no other way to describe it. It's extremely personal. There is no fixed way to deal with it. Why? Because the problem that many people will face when trying to fix grief
Hmm.
is that there's a heavy social cultural baggage lens that you have to heavily so. So religion plays a role, culture plays a role, your personal beliefs play a role, even the proximity to your family plays a role. There are so many variables to consider. So if we look at it clinically, if your grief has persisted for uh, more than 6 months up to a year after the impact event, you are considered to have, help me out, Hannah, is this complicated grief or prolonged grief? Which one is it?
Prolonged grief
Uh,
disorder.
Prolonged
Prolonged.
grief, thank you. It's prolonged grief, which is considered dysfunctional. You
Hmm.
need to get treatment for it.
Hmm.
Um, now, the thing is that it's very easy to say that, but how do you how do you determine whether someone grieving their son's death or their daughter's death or their father's or mother's death, how do you tell them that, oh, you're not grieving right because it's taking you too long to recover?
Yeah.
How do you say
Yeah.
that to someone with a straight face, right? And for example, let's say somebody gets over the death of a very good relationship with their father or mother in 3 months, but someone with a bad relationship with their same parent is still unable to overcome it after 2 years. What? How is that help? Like, how do you balance that? Every
Yeah.
grief is unique, right? Um, but I mean, obviously Hina would have more to contribute. What do you say?
Yeah, I would also add one thing here that sometimes we think that this event happened, we're grieving, so that's it. Now we have like completed the process, we have completed that 5 stages, so now it's all over. Now I should be all perfect and fine.
Mm,
But I usually tell my clients this is that grief is sometimes like a vessel. It changes its shape. Yes, you will be better resourceful, you will have different anchor points and stuff, but at the same time your grief stays with you. You're better able to manage it because of your resources and anchors, but at the end of the day that's something very personal and it does stays with you throughout. You just say we say vessel changes its shape. Maybe in the start it was very big, but
mm.
eventually it became super small, but it's still there. So
You
grief
carry
never,
it with you.
yeah, you carry it with you
Mm.
basically.
So,
So it's a good thing actually that this slipped my mind, and Hina very, very kindly brought it up. The 5 stages of grief, which is considered the de facto model of healthy grieving. You have to go through 5 very specific emotional states before you can be declared as having grieved completely or gone through the full cycle. So it's in no particular order because there's variations on this, but there's 5 specific emotions.
okay.
The one I prefer to explain to clients is the first stage is disbelief. I
Mm,
can't believe this has happened.
mm,
I know this is not real. This can't have happened.
mm,
Stage two is anger. I refuse to believe this has happened. You're wrong. You're lying to me.
mm.
Whatever. Stage three is disbelief, I believe. No, wait, it's depression. Sorry.
Depression.
It's depression. Oh, now that this has happened, I don't know how am I going to move on? What is the meaning of life? Stage four, I believe, is bargaining. Yeah, I will talk to anyone. I'll do anything to make this pain go away, make it
Mm,
stop.
mm,
Stage five, that obviously the one you're working towards, acceptance. Yeah, I know
mm,
it happened, but I'm okay. It's okay. I know how to deal with it.
mm.
So it sounds very, very generic, but this is real. This is a real thing. I have
No,
seen so many clients that, and
And
mind you,
mm,
you won't go through it
yeah.
like cleanly.
in an order.
I
Yeah,
think,
yeah,
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 there you go.
exactly.
Thank you.
It's
So most,
always in the form of waves. One day
Yeah.
can be better, the next day can be completely terrifying.
oh yeah.
And one
Yeah.
more thing that I would add that sometimes people don't directly jump onto like the first denial phase. Maybe they have
Mm-hmm.
anger in the start and then denial, then bargaining, or maybe they start off with bargaining. So these stages are not fixed stages. Everyone goes
Yeah.
through them differently. They experience it differently as well.
Mm. Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Bilal, you raised a point like a couple of minutes ago that there are, when it comes to grief, there are multiple things associated. There is religion, there is social expectations. So, especially talking about coming from the area where religion and culture has a very strong role to play in it, how do cultural background or how do religion has, both of these have a role to play in the whole process of your grief journey?
Okay. So the thing is that spirituality is a very big component of grieving
Mm,
as a whole journey.
mm,
I think it's safe to say it's very much part of the process.
mm,
If we look at each major religion, they all have their own rituals and beliefs regarding death.
mm,
If you look at Hinduism, they cremate the dead and then they
mm,
spread the ashes.
mm,
With Islam, they will bury their dead. They
mm,
will, rituals, etc. So those are all very baked in.
mm.
The thing is that, uh,
A little bit
oh,
of problem from your side with the
sorry,
voice.
sorry
Yeah.
about that. The rituals are supposed to help you navigate the process by giving you consolation that there's something more or whatnot.
Mm,
But ultimately, at day's end, the journey of grief still remains personal.
mm,
I have met so many clients who have both found their spirituality as well as abandoned their spirituality after
mm,
the death of a
mm,
close one.
mm,
It's gone both ways, and both of them have come out much healthier once they've
mm,
gone through the stages.
mm,
But to say that there's a fixed way which is better than others, no, that's not true.
mm.
In this region, however, there's one specific ritual which, as a clinician, I find problematic in that you are kind of hurried through your grief.
Mm.
You're told that there's what,
There's like
three
a
days, I
timeline
believe.
or something, yes.
Three
There's like a
days.
3 day thing where they say that you're only supposed to grieve for 3 days, I believe.
Yeah.
But don't quote me on that. I'm not very good with
Mm,
spirituality. So I think it's 3 days, and then you're supposed to be okay. What came from God will return to God, which I find a little disingenuous, mostly because 3 days is nothing. That's nothing. We have decades of research of people who have not recovered from grief. And, but then again, belief is a very strong
Mm,
motivator in
mm,
grief as well. If you believe they're in a better place, it helps
mm,
your healing. It does.
mm.
But it also depends on your relationship with the deceased.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
that is a huge contributing factor
absolutely,
as
yes.
well. Um, I know I'm forgetting other stuff, and now please help me out here.
Yeah. So I was going to add another point into it. When we say that there are just 3 days for grieving process, there's also a preset timeline, and then there's this belief system that operates, especially in the Pakistani dynamic or Asian culture, is this that if you're going to cry, their soul is going to be hurt,
Yeah.
right? They will be in pain. And this
Mhm.
immediately gives a person or the people grieving this idea that I am not supposed to feel my grief. I'm
It's
not
like
supposed to cry for them. Even if it's
disregarding
a
their pain.
yeah,
Mm,
it's basically it's negating or dismissing their emotions or their feelings for them,
mm,
and eventually it creates a loop or it creates a belief system that I'm not supposed to like grieve for them. I'm not supposed to feel it. I'm not
mm,
supposed to cry because it's going to hurt them, and I don't want to hurt them. And eventually what happens is this, that the people start feeling guilty if they cry about it,
yeah,
or
yeah.
they completely stop feeling anything about their grief, because our culture mostly focuses on what we can do next versus what we can do in the minute or in the moment.
You have raised a very good point. I think growing up, I would have experienced this myself, and I have seen people going through it. That once you agree, a person, loss of a person. Once you are grieving a person, there are so many opinions about how to grieve a person. Especially comes with that you can't cry because their soul is going to be heavy and their soul is going to experience some negative energy or whatever.
Hmm.
Okay, so before I talk about this particular point, I'll mention that I am a spiritual person myself. I believe in religious, it's a very important part that, for example, if you are practicing a certain religion, following their religious ritual in order to move on with the process of healing or a process of grief has a big role to play. Once we bury the body, we do feel that there is an acceptance level that the person is gone and now we have to move on. Having said that, there is still another perception if a person is grieving, and if that person would come to me and say, I have been reciting all day long. I have been offering 5 prayers a day. I have been in contact with the divine, but still there is a void. Still, I do
Mhm.
feel that I do not feel better. So you can't counter argument with another argument that you need to have some professional help as well, apart from having a religious rituals or religious beliefs. So it makes you an anti-religious person. So how to deal with this part, that although religion and spirituality has a very big role to play in order to deal with your grief, there are certain other elements which are absolutely necessary if you want to move on as a healthy person.
Okay, so
Dr. Bilal, a little bit voice issue.
uh,
Sorry.
hold on. I'll just move my mic
Mm,
closer.
mm.
How about that? That's good.
Yeah, better.
Yeah, okay,
Yes.
sorry about that.
Mm,
So one thing that I've encountered, at least in my clinical practice, is that when they very reluctantly come and they're like, "Oh, we've been forced to come here because we're not dealing with things right." So they will talk and, "Oh yes, my brother died and this and that, but I'm fine." And I'll just sit there saying, "Okay, so if you're fine, then why are you struggling?"
mm,
And to which they will often come up with whatever reason they do. Eventually, I lead them to the metaphor of, look, if you have someone with cancer, you will pray for them, you will do everything the rituals ask you, but you will also seek the appropriate counsel of someone versed in dealing with that, right?
mm,
On the material level, not on necessarily spiritual. Death has physical effects.
mm,
It does. In your body. It changes the way your brain functions. It
mm,
does. Death changes, again, if we use that word neuroplasticity, it changes the way your brain is shaped because grief does that. It
mm,
changes the way you feel things. It is only fair that someone should be able to help you navigate the material realm,
mm,
with the appropriate skills, exercises, metaphors. We do a lot of metaphor work when it comes to grief. There's
mm,
so much metaphor work because there's nothing that we can say, go do yoga, go eat this, go drink this, and
mm.
your bad feelings will go away. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah,
Grief,
yeah.
you use the metaphor of it comes in waves,
Mm,
right?
Mm.
I use the same metaphor. I say that there's low tide, there's high tide, and then there's the
Mm.
tsunami of grief,
Mm. Mm.
right? The days where you're just unable to function or identify top from bottom, left from right, because the
Mm.
grief is overwhelming,
Mm.
right? And yes, the metaphor work is extremely helpful, but it also depends heavily on the other person's willingness to accept that they are moving on because, and this sounds like a fallacy, many people who go through grief think if they stop feeling the pain, they have forgotten the person.
Yeah, I've seen that.
It's I don't want to say that it's normal to think that because that would make it seem like it's accepted. It's
Mm.
not because the thing is that you can memorialize.
Mm.
Memorialization is a big part of grief work,
Mm.
but being in pain, I think, is a poor substitute for remembering someone. I think that. I mean, to use a very tired analogy, they would not want you in pain because they
Yeah.
have to leave, right?
Mm.
But I'm sure, obviously, Hina has her views, right?
One thing that I would add when you were saying that sometimes people who are highly spiritual, they're performing all the rituals, everything that the religion asks them to do, but still they're grieving. There is a concept called as spiritual bypassing, where yes, the spirituality or the religious aspect helps you shape your belief systems, help you surpass that thing, but eventually the event that's happening उसका physical emotional psychological impact आपकी bodies तब भी face कर रही होती हैं.
Mm.
One thing especially for clients who are highly religious and spiritual I do quote is this, that even our paygambars, even the prophets
Mm.
themselves used to struggle and grieve for
Yeah.
years for their
Yeah.
son's death, for years for the things, for the battles they lost, for the wives they
Mm.
lost, for all
Mm.
that stuff. If religion was to shame the
Mm.
grief element,
Mm.
our prophets would have not been going through that whole that process and all of that. But neither here nor there, I'm talking about spirituality bypassing, where it's this, that it helps you
Mm.
believe in a higher divine, it helps you believe in a higher purpose, but at the same time it also makes one feel like they're not doing something well here. That is the reason they start believing this thing that, oh, there's something wrong, I'm still unable to, get past it and still unable to forget them, because
Mm.
they're forgetting the point that you're not supposed to forget them. You're
Yeah.
not supposed to bypass this. This is helping you shape your belief systems, but at the end of the day, your feelings and emotions are valid, and they
Mm.
still stand strong on where you are currently in the
Mm.
present moment, not
Mm.
what happened, not how connected you are. Because in these moments, just like Dr. Bilal said, that sometimes people lose their spirituality and sometimes they grow stronger to that. The religion does not shame either of it,
Yeah.
because if we look at the examples of what we are taught,
Mm. Mm.
there were both sorts of examples, right? There were all kinds of examples where people grew stronger
Yeah.
based on religion, as well as they lost their religious aspect or they became disconnected with it. So it's
Yeah.
not discouraged, it's just the acknowledgement of that this event is making me feel like this
Yeah.
event is making me feel disconnected from the religion right now. It's
Mm.
making me feel that bypass from my spirituality, it's
Mm.
making my
Mm-hmm.
emotions are not come on the surface right now.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. Thank you so much for pointing these two things regarding the religion and spirituality. And I would also add that even during the grief period, because it is not in your control properly, even if you feel that you are disconnected from your religion or spirituality, it is okay because it is not an irreversible thing. You can always come back. You can always reach out to the whole belief system that you believe in anyway. But yeah, moving on to the idea that we have talked about how does the grief actually work and what are the categories and how does the what's the process look like and what kinds are there. If I come to the coping mechanism, every person has a different coping mechanism to deal with things. Here we are talking about loss, but have you, in your practice, have you ever experienced that there are certain strategies which are actually healthier and can actually increase the pace of the whole journey of grief?
So, there is an answer to this which everyone hates, but is unfortunately true. Exercise.
Okay.
Um, we hate suggesting that. I certainly hate suggesting that to clients
Same
because
to same.
it's such a generic non-answer that they almost feel insulted that you suggest that.
Hmm.
Yeah, because you people love suggesting exercise as a solution for grief. for body pain, for
Depression,
depression, for anxiety.
toxins, yes.
But but unfortunately, our bodies are designed to self-regulate if you give them that kind of challenge. We are designed to move around and whatnot. We are not designed to be sedentary. And something I say to, again, this is something I encourage with my clients. I often tell them, look, grief makes you want to curl up and die. It
Yeah,
does. It makes you want to give up,
yeah.
get angry, get pissed, get livid, because anger makes you want to do something,
Mm.
you know. And,
It's
and
a
I'm not saying
feeling.
go beat up someone, but
Mm.
do something with yourself. Because the problem with healthy healing is that it takes so much out of you. It's not easy. It is supposed to be easy, admittedly. It's not supposed to be easy, because again, it is such a huge hurdle.
Yeah.
How something that I wish more people understood about grief is that when you lose someone, let's take the death example. When you lose someone, you now have to recreate your personality with their absence in
Oh,
mind,
yeah.
right? And recreating your personality is there. It's a challenge to
It's a
say
lot
the
of
least.
work. Mm.
So much work.
Mm.
And the thing is that if you're older, let's say that you're in your 30s, 40s, whatever, you have however many memories associated with that presence,
Mm.
and now you have to create a personality that is without them. So you're going to be
Mm.
living in, two sets of mind at once.
Mm.
It is so challenging.
Mm.
So what can you do? Well, honestly, I often, again, I'm not going to recommend exercise at first, but I often tell a client, whatever helps. Some
Mm.
people take yoga,
Mm.
some people take prayer. Some people, unfortunately, go towards substance abuse, alcohol, drugs, smoking up, whatever. And while I won't necessarily tell them don't do this, I will recommend, look, there are better alternatives. But if this works in the short term, I won't hold it against you. No judgment. We know this. No judgment. But know that A, alcohol is a known depressant. It will make it worse. And,
Mm.
smoking up, unfortunately, has its own set of addictive challenges. So, but do whatever works for you. As long as you are working through it,
Mm.
remember that must be
Mm.
there because if, let's say that someone dedicates themselves to video games,
Mm.
they're not dealing with anything. They're just
Mm.
distracting themselves. Dealing with it, distracting yourself
Mm.
can often look the same,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So, there's significantly more to this than just do this, do that. I tell them do what works for you. I don't know, Hina, what do you do?
Yeah, I agree on the same part that encourage my clients the same as well. That because since we say that grief is personal experience,
Yeah.
not one exercise or not one coping technique or tool would work on everyone. So
Mm.
it depends on what sort of space the client themselves are, the people themselves are, and what can
Mm.
actually help them. And it also depends on their resources as well. For
Mm.
instance, we as clinicians, we say that, oh, you should be going out, you should be going at gym and, having physical stuff and
Mm.
all of that, but they don't earn that much. They don't
Mm.
have that capacity to actually go to gym and
Mm.
exercise. So
Mm.
it would eventually put more load on them than
Yeah.
actually help them feel better about that too. One more thing that I also encourage clients is that we as humans, we are wired for connection. We are wired for connectivity to
Yeah.
feel like, someone is there to
Mm.
witness our pain, someone is there
Mm.
for us. So I generally encourage them that even if you have one person who kinds of just sits with you during this process, that's all what matters. They don't
Mm.
have to offer
Mm.
you advices, they don't have to even understand, but if they're there to witness it, that's what matters, and eventually your body will
Mm.
feel regulated in their
Mm.
energy.
I'll pick up this exact point. Okay, so a person is grieving something. Sometimes they are unaware of what stage they are, if they're it is okay to feel that way. But for example, I am experiencing a person going through a certain thing. We ourselves, while we are not grieving, but we are understanding that someone else is grieving something or someone, how can we present our support and how can we help? And I'll also add one more point here. It's not just the death of a person, it's just losing a person while they are still alive. How can we help or support our loved ones in order to process the whole journey in order to come out of it in a better way? What's our role?
Okay, so the good, like, I'm glad you bring this up because that literally just hit me right now that, wait, a lot of people don't really understand how to support people who are grieving,
Yes.
in any fashion, whether it's
Mm.
death or
Yeah.
otherwise, right? Myself, when I didn't get into my dream university, I was distraught. And I think literally every second person would be, what's the big deal? There are other universities, right? What's the big deal? They would
Again,
trivialize
dismissing
it. They would
someone's
try to
pain.
put it down, saying that, oh, but you have alternatives. Then that just makes it even worse because the person going through it will immediately come to the conclusion that they cannot trust this person with their emotions.
Yeah.
That they cannot be trusted because they will diminish or worse, make you feel ashamed, right?
Yeah.
So one of my favorite things to recommend to people who are grieving, if the family member comes to me saying, they didn't get into their university or something similar, I will often tell them, just sit with them and ask them if they want to talk. That's it, ask permission. One of the rules of grief therapy that Hina and I, we both agree on, is that before we even let the client talk about it, we ask permission. We have to ask permission because it's assuming a lot to think that the other person is going to open up to you just because they're going through a rough time. No, some people are
They need to
experiencing
be ready.
not so much ready, but they need to know that they have agency in the matter because a lot of people take grief as something that's open for the arena of public opinion,
Yeah.
right? Everyone, I mean, again, when let's take the typical example, when there's a death, there's always that narrative of, God give you strength, God give you patience, we're so sorry for your loss, we're this, we're that, we're this, we're that. But at no point, even in my own experiences, did someone actually just come up to me and say, hey, do you want to talk? They assumed everything in the conversation. Oh, you must be going through a lot. It's really tough. Hang in there. You'll get this. At no point was I ever asked, hey, listen, do you want to talk? I was never asked that. And that was one of my biggest issues with how many people approach it. You don't let the person, like Hannah said earlier, you don't let them have their own space. And if a client has, at least for me, has ever said, no, I don't want to talk about it, I'm like, yeah, okay, I completely understand. That's okay. Hands off, right? I'm sure Hannah has her own experiences similar to this.
Yeah, I completely agree with Dr. Bilal on everything he said. And one thing that I would like to add is that for people who are going through the grief process, there is a very prominent component of feeling like they don't have control over their lives, or they will feel like, they can't manage stuff because they lost someone that was so precious. They lost something that was very, so uncertain or something. So they operate from that uncertainty perspective that I don't have agency or control over my life. I cannot figure my things out. So when someone gives their advices or they come up with their opinions, they start doubting everything they've ever thought about
Yeah.
themselves
Oh,
or that
been there.
person or that whole experience. And then eventually it brings up that very common emotion or very common experience that clients shares, that we feel guilty when we share our experience because of those opinions, because of those advices, we feel like we're doing something wrong. Our grief is like not inclining to what mostly people go through. So there is something that we are missing. उस moment के अंदर the only thing that sometimes helps client is this, that there's no fixed set routines for grief. If there's something that you want to do it your way, that's your honor, that's your person, that's your loss. No one gets to define what works for you and what does not work for you.
Very
And
true.
agreed with Dr. Bilal that whenever a client comes in, always ask for permission first. Even generally with your friends, with your family as well, if you are sensing that someone is not okay or someone is going through something, rather than having assumptions of, XYZ would be the reason, ask them like, hey, hey, like, I think there's something off, or maybe if you want to go hang out. And with this, with friends especially, I would consider that consistency matters a lot. Even if you're
Yes.
just existing with them, it doesn't matter what big events or what big things you're doing from them. You're just existing with them and you're consistent in that. Your friends eventually heal or come back.
Dr. Hina, you have pointed out a few very small gestures, consistency, presence, and just not assuming things, because they are the things, they are extremely small, and you can practice them in daily life, but they can have a lifelong impact, a very good impact. And even when you want to see, when you meet, let's say we meet our colleagues every day, so we can actually experience a shift of their body energy, a shift of their mood. And if it's consistent, then we can tell them that we are present, I am present, hey, you want to talk, you can talk. So coming from a background where when they there is not enough space to talk about your emotions all the time, including the family setups, there would be so many unresolved grief effect on people who have reached to a certain point where now, okay, if I would think about it, okay, now it's not even the time left that I would think about something that happened in 2000. What impact a person face when he or she hasn't gone through uh, spending the whole period of grief? What impact does it have?
So the thing is that grief can hit you at the strangest moment.
Hmm.
And the thing is that because Hina very, Dr. Hina, she pointed out so astutely early on when she said that it is something you carry for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
The thing is that if, let's say, again, if you lost a sibling or you lost a parent, even 20 years later, something so random can cause you to have a complete emotional breakdown because it just blindsided you out of nowhere. It could be, for example, it could be someone wearing the same perfume, something we take for granted. It could be someone with the same body shape on the street where you look at them and you're just like, wait, what? What? It just catches you off guard. Or sometimes, and this is something multiple clients have said to me on occasion, is that sometimes they will see a meme online and they're like, oh, I want to share it with,
Oh my
oh,
God, yes.
oh, right? And that one hit me the most because that is such a simple gesture of affection, and it's something you take for granted, and
Hmm.
oh, that sudden deflation that comes afterwards.
Yeah.
So the thing is that you have to recognize that, again, many people think an expression of grief is, as Dr. Hina pointed out, a problem for whatever reason. I often ask them that, is your grief an inconvenience for someone? Because if it is, they are not allowed to see you grieve. They're not worth
Hmm.
it. If your grief is an inconvenience for them,
Hmm.
grief is a show of vulnerability. When I was going through training, my trainer, she actually said that the amount of grief you experience is equivalent to the amount of love you felt,
Hmm.
right? Which admittedly it's a little basic, but I completely agree with her. I completely agree with her because the thing is that it's true. In my experience, it is true. If you're still thinking about that one person who passed away 20 years later, they gave you the kind of love which lasted 20 years, because the memories were so fulfilling or so cherished. So the thing is that, yes, grief, if you haven't experienced all the stages, that doesn't mean that you have dysfunctional grief or you haven't healed. It just means that your journey might not necessarily be one which you will complete in someone else's timeline, right? Some people take years, some people take weeks,
Hmm.
some people, surprisingly, actually can heal in days.
Hmm.
Just, I won't behoove them for it. I will be a little skeptical, but if it works, it works.
Hmm.
But the thing is, again, it depends. And I hate using that phrase because, therapists use that for literally everything, it depends. So, see, but yeah, but I mean, I'm sure Hina has her views on this too.
Yeah, one thing that I completely agree with, whatever Dr. Bilal said, because essentially when we say that grief is a personal experience, everyone
Yeah.
has a different connotations or different things attached to it. There is a very common perspective of attachment injuries associated with grief, because whenever we talk about the thing we lost or when we talk about the person we lost, we do have some sort of attachment to that person. When we talk about feeling connected to that person, or having that love that was there for 20 years and it still hits you at odd times, it's basically operating from that core attachments that we as human, every human has. And when we love that thing or when we are connected to that thing, and if it's lost somewhere, if it's not there, those injuries stays with us, those injuries stays within our bodies, and eventually a slightest hit or slightest trigger can pull you back to the same phase or put you back to the same point where you actually experience that trauma or experience that grief
Hmm.
itself. So it's not like if you experience grief 20, 30 years before and now you're a completely different person, or you're not, the grief or the that environment doesn't exist anymore in your surroundings, so you might not have those symptoms or you might not feel that. But when we say that grief is like a vessel, you carry it throughout your life. It doesn't matter how much you age, it doesn't matter how many different environments you are in, or it doesn't matter what sort of like friend groups or families or relationships you are in, it still stays within you and it passes on to every stage in life with you.
Can you reopen the unresolved things 10 years later?
Sometimes I guess yes, when you are consciously aware of those things, when you consciously want to work out for those things, so you can bring in awareness for how your body felt in that moment and the parts of your body that still feel those things, the part of your body that would still hold something for it.
Yeah, because I think every person, when they are experiencing something, let's say in their childhood, you don't remember everything that happened in your childhood, but there are certain events which can resurface and you actually can relive the whole experience, and you would still be curious that how did I feel it so strongly when it happened like 25 years ago? So, can you deal with them after you are self-aware? Okay, this happened and I need to deal with it.
Hmm.
Is it possible?
Yeah, because when we say
No, go
Yeah,
ahead. Go
yeah.
ahead.
I was just adding that when we say that the first step towards like dealing with any thing is like acknowledgement of that event, acknowledgement of that feelings and associated symptoms that it might had or the impact it might had, then eventually your bodies become receptive of the fact that yes, I went through this. Yes, this is something I still hold. And then you can start working on it. Then it can surface up and then you can work on it. I think Dr. Bilal would have a better say in this matter as well.
So the thing is that everything Hina said is just spot on. This is both the title of a very helpful book as well as a phrase we do use.
Dr. Bilal, your voice again. I'm so sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so it's bad mic. My goodness. So, like I was saying, there's a phrase we use in therapy that therapists use a lot. It's also the title of a very, very heavy but very useful book. The
Yeah.
body keeps the score.
I've heard
So
about it.
It's my favorite.
I'm sure
It's
you have.
it's my favorite phrase.
I love it as well because it is such a powerful statement that communicates everything without needing to be explained. Your body keeps the score. Your mind will process and put it away on a nice little shelf in your head. But if your body is put in the same situation, it will react exactly the same
Yeah.
way as if it's a fresh trauma. So, not the topic of this episode, but let's say you went through physical abuse as a child, right? Let's say 20 years later, you're a grown adult, and someone raises their hand in your vicinity, a man, a slightly bigger man. You
You
will
would be
react like a
scared of
frightened
life at that moment.
eight-year-old. Yes,
Yes.
because your body remembers, even though
God.
your mind is just like, what am I worried about? Right? So the thing is that grief is exactly the same way because that helplessness, that meaninglessness, that loss of direction, your body stores it, right? So the thing is, that's why for a lot of people, if they go to the grave, for example, or if they're dealing with the personal effects of the deceased, that comes back in waves because you again, your body remembers. Even though you might have processed it in your head, can you deal with it? To go back to your question, absolutely. But it starts with acknowledgement. If you're going to deny that it ever happened, oh, no, 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 I'm fine. No, no, it happens. It's okay. No, it's okay. No big deal. Your body will resist. It will resist because your mind is saying that, but your body does not accept it. Because remember, your body will react in a survival mechanism. It will react as if you're trying to fight for life, to get away from death.
Hmm.
So yes, you will go through a trigger episode until you acknowledge it happened and you embrace it. Embrace in the sense that you accept, yes, it happened. Yes, I will allow it to be felt because once you do, the body will relax. Okay, it's okay,
So, are
right?
there any misconceptions regarding grief and the grief journey?
Ooh, so many, so many.
Give us a few.
Um, um, well, I'd like to sit on this for a minute. Dr. Hannah, please, you go ahead first. I actually have so many in my head.
So one of the very common one is that this is your timeline and this is how it should be like, and these are the stages you have to go through all of these stuff. Otherwise, you are not dealing with it rightly. Otherwise, it's going to come back even years later. But
Mm.
when clients come up and they say this, that they read it somewhere, especially Google is our worst enemy because it's either categorizes one into that they might just die because of
Yeah.
their symptoms or they're just worse. So I would say that when clients come up and they say, okay, ye fixed timeline and we are not operating from this, so are we not doing something well or our journey would be stuck somewhere? That is not true. There are no fixed timelines for grief or the journey for grief. It depends on person to person. It depends on the resources. I keep focusing on this thing that it depends on the resources because, yes, if you have good social support, yes, if you have good people, if you have empathetic energies with you, you might tend to come out of grief. You might tend to heal better or go into your recovery phase or acceptance stage quicker than those who don't have these things because you have
Absolutely,
stronger
yes.
foundations, you have stronger relationships, you have a strong family background
Mm,
versus those who don't have these resources, they might lag behind or they might
mm,
struggle.
mm,
A second very common misconception here is that if I don't miss them daily, if I don't think about them daily, I'm going to forget them. Or
yeah.
if I'm doing my daily life, if I'm like working out and all of that and I don't mention about them, so there's something I'm doing that will eventually make me forget, and the people will think that, oh, her life is so perfect, she just lost like someone too close to her 2 days ago. How is she
Mm,
pretending? Or she's not true to that person. She wasn't feeling for that much for that person. It was all fake. A lot of
mm,
clients come in and they say they share these stories, and this is something that the society or our culture has generalized that, oh, there are certain days that you should be more upset, especially when we talk about death anniversaries. People are expected to be sad and crying and visiting graves and all of that for those days. For some people, they deal in a different way. They might do charity work, they might go out with their friends, they might do their favorite work, the person they lost, they might like
They
do
honor the
make
loss.
their, yeah, they might honor that loss. But our society and cultures has specifically made it that on that day you should be sad or you should be like,
mm,
doing some different sorts of things which is predefined since forever.
I'll also add the exact opposite. If you are acting in the exact opposite way, that you're still sad or still grieving after a one month, even then people are not going to let it go. They'll be like, okay, it's been 1 month, you're still feeling
Yeah.
it. So one way or
mm.
the
Hmm.
other, you are going to be challenged.
So
Definitely.
I'm just gonna go to the classic one, which I think all of us would agree. Oh, you're just not praying enough.
Yeah.
Why aren't you praying? You need to pray more. You've lost touch with divinity, religion, whatever. You need to pray more. That's a classic. That infuriates me not just as a therapist, but also just as a person, because this really, I mean, making a lot of assumptions, aren't you? So, which again goes back to what I said about permission. Um, no, everyone's relationship is different. Never assume anything. If they're not showing it, that could mean they're okay. It could mean they're not. Okay? That's all I would say. There are so many misconceptions about grief, but you can address, I think, I would like to think at least, all of them by just
Hmm.
them. That
Hmm.
will fix almost all the misconceptions surrounding how a person is feeling.
Hmm.
And trust them. If they tell you they're fine, accept it because some people will actually test the other person.
Hmm.
Because unfortunately, people like to kind of challenge people's assertions because of their own beliefs.
Hmm.
Hey, buddy, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure you don't want to talk about it? They just leave me alone. They will
Hmm.
tell you if they want to tell you, and give them that, right? That would be my sort of
Hmm.
biggest thing. Please don't ask them if don't tell them to pray more.
What's moving on? Like, what does it actually mean to move on from your grief, from loss of a person, whether it's death, whether it's a breakup, whether it's a divorce? What does it mean to move on from a person? And can you really move on by keeping the honor? Is it possible to heal properly from your previous loss? I think you have already answered that question, but yet I'll ask it again.
Well, no, because I would actually slightly change what you're asking. You're healed properly. What does properly look like? Because every journey is unique. So that phrase
Yeah,
in and of itself is
yeah.
it doesn't work. So
By
is it possible
properly
to heal?
means that the previous loss wouldn't have an impact on your next. relationship on your
Ah,
next phase of life.
okay.
That's the
So
time.
that's different. I would say that yes, it is absolutely possible to heal. However, I would say that it's more important to ask the person if they have evolved from it, because evolution is irreversible and you evolve after death
Oh, you do.
or loss. You
Hmm.
evolve. You do not change. You grow, you evolve because your reality has reached a new status quo,
Hmm.
right? And it's
Hmm.
irreversible. You have to evolve. Or,
Hmm.
as if we use the evolution metaphor, you develop dysfunctional coping methods.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean you forget them. Doesn't mean that
Hmm.
they don't have an impact on your life. They will absolutely have an impact on your life. But you can use that as a lesson for how you will navigate any subsequent relationship or subsequent events of a similar nature.
Hmm.
At least that's how I encourage my clients to move
Hmm.
forward. I'm sure Dr. Hina has her own method as well.
One thing I completely agree with Dr. Bilal that eventually when you ask someone, that is the first step to, recovery. That is the first step to know what sort of impact it has. But at the same time, especially when we talk about relationships, ask that person what sort of attachment, what sort of relationship you had with that thing or with that person, because this can also give another person an idea for the kind of emotional sentiments or the kind of emotional connectivity that person has with that thing and how much they need to give them space in order to move on, or they need to give them their agency over that thing. Just like Dr. Bilal said that in the start, when some things like these happen, always ask.
Hmm.
And eventually when you ask, there's a lot of things that can open up. And when I say consistency, I don't mean that if your friends or if your family member, if some person who's going through it does not want to talk, you start sending them those messages every
Yeah.
other day.
Yeah. It's just the
Because that
presence.
will,
Hmm.
yeah, it's just the presence, because that will eventually irritate them to the point that they will eventually shut down. They would
Yeah.
not talk to anyone because
Yeah.
they'll be like, even if I'm okay, the other person sends me a text that,
Hmm.
oh, what's up? Are you okay? Are you sure?
I think even when it comes to grief, boundaries have a big role to play in it.
Yeah,
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, of
Yeah.
course,
yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
absolutely.
Okay, so it's my favorite question I'll ask every time. When is the time? If, for example, even if a person is aware of what they have lost and they are going through a process, there would still be a point to understand that now it's time to take professional help.
Mhm.
So when it
Good
comes to
point.
grief, what is that point? That now you actually need a third party to analyze you, navigate your life properly now.
So I think I would react differently to this question than I typically do. My typical answer being, you should have gone yesterday. With this, I would say that there's nothing wrong with going to someone and just asking them, do you think I need to work on this? Because anyone who does grief therapy handles you with extreme care and extreme empathy. And if you talk to them, the first thing they will be evaluating and want to evaluate is if there's any benefit in you
Hmm.
coming to them. That would
Hmm.
be the first thing because they don't want to burden you any further.
Hmm.
Because grief therapy often unpacks a lot of very unpleasant feelings
Hmm.
associated with the passing. Not just the passing, there's the history, there's the relationship, there's other factors. It'll bring out other things as well. So
Hmm.
we have to be very careful when someone asks us. I have told so many people, I've done the opposite, where people come to me for something different and then they end up taking grief therapy. I have had some people who came to me specifically for grief therapy, and I told them, no, you're okay. You're doing fine. Just go on, live your life. And
Hmm.
some of them are actually very disappointed. They're
Hmm.
like, what do you mean, live my life?
Hmm.
I'm like, yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. Do whatever works for you. You don't need me in your life right now.
Hmm.
You don't need me to guide you. You're doing fine,
Hmm.
right? So when's the right time? Well, if you're worried about it, just go ask. That's
Hmm.
it. Just go ask.
Hmm.
Same thing. I mean,
Dr. Hina, one more thing. When it comes to grief, do we have to have that idea that I have to go to a specific counselor, I have to go to a specific person? Because in my personal opinion, I don't think every therapist can handle the grief portion. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Not every therapist can actually give grief counseling or therapy itself. in Pakistani culture, there is this misconception that I love to highlight, that every therapist adds every specialization in their domain and they're like giving therapies for every sort of disorders, every sort, children, adults, whatever. But this is where the issue lies, right? Grief therapists, just like Dr. Bilal said, are very well equipped with empathy, with connectedness, with their mind body connection, with how the client themselves want to share rather than what the therapist wants them in their journey, right? So if you have those trainings, if you have those specializations, I always encourage my clients to ask before if I myself is even dealing with such kind of cases or not. If not, that's not my job to do that. But in Pakistani dynamic, in our culture, we don't generally ask therapists what sort of trainings do they have, what sort of caseloads do they deal with, and that is where the issue comes in, because then the therapist would, apply CBT to someone who's not in the right space to actually, rewire their belief system, reframe their thought patterns. And then eventually the clients have this belief system that therapy sucks and it's not working out for
Yeah,
me. So
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
never going to go to therapy again.
Going to the right person is the most important decision.
Yeah. Yeah.
It, it's again to add on to what Dr. Henna said. Ask your therapist questions. Please ask them questions. Just because they're a clinician doesn't mean that they are miles above you and untouchable. They are not. They are people.
Agreed.
If you're trained adequately, we are so glad when someone asks us questions because it means that they're taking their mental health seriously.
Seriously,
Please take
yes.
it seriously. Please ask questions. What have you studied? Where have you studied? How long have you practiced? Do you deal with these cases? No, please make a referral. It's a statement of skill if you are able to address a client's concerns without actually giving them therapy. If you can signpost them correctly, it shows how much of a professional you are. Many people take it the other way. They think that if they turn away a client that they have failed.
Yeah.
No, how is that failure? You are not equipped. I mean, you wouldn't go to a surgeon if, you have a headache, which has no neurological base. I mean,
Yeah.
really now. So this is no different. Please ask questions. I cannot recommend this enough, and I'm so glad that, Dr. Henna brought that up as something because I keep forgetting to recommend that. Please.
Dr. Hina, any last thing I would have missed and would be the, important for this discussion, I would like you to add that before I wrap up.
One I think we've pretty much summed up so many different aspects to grief and different kind of associations associated with grief. But one thing that I would add at the end is that when we talk about grief and its impact, one thing we often forget is that sometimes people don't understand its impact in the moment, but they observe its impact after some time. And us point ke andar mostly people say like it's not associated with that anymore, right? There are XYZ events happening in your life, it's because of that. But if a person is telling that, you know what, I feel like now it's hitting me, please don't ever, dismiss that. Don't ever let them say like, no, this is another reason that might be possible. Let them just bring it out.
Yeah. Dr. Bilal, from your side as well.
Look, grief is one of my clinical specialties. It's something I love dealing with, and I am quite distraught and upset when clients are unable to express themselves, even though we can see it. Grief is one of those things which you cannot hide from an experienced clinician. They will see it long before the client can, and that's why I'm so glad that Dr. Hina could join us today, because I need more clinicians to take this seriously. As much as I need clients to take it seriously, I need clinicians to take this seriously as well. Grief has a very specific way of being managed in a clinical context. And I just need more people to recognize it rather than dismissing it as depression or, you don't pray enough or you need to go run more or you need to socialize more. Please take it seriously. It has such long reaching effects in your life. And the later you deal with it, the more difficult it is to process effectively.
Yeah.
You can still process it. It effectively becomes a bit of an issue. So please take it seriously. That's all I would say.
Let me take a moment to thank both of you, to join, to share your wisdom, to your knowledge, one thing, while we were having this discussion, there were so many conversations that were making me, there were so many emotions that resurfaced in my own mind that I have dealt with. Some are still unresolved. But what amazes me that people like you, they're actually dedicating, you are dedicating your lives to listen to these countless stories, whether it's about grief or it's about depression or anything for that matter. And while listening to that, you're continuously offering support, you're continuously offering empathy and hope and guidance, whatever is needed in their harder times. So it cannot be easy. Like, even if 1 hour of discussion can make you feel a little bit heavier and relive your own things or your own traumas, it can't be easy. So it's, before I wrap up, I need to applaud this. It's extremely laudable. But hearing your perspective, I did realize, and I think everyone out there would have realized it, that we are never as alone as we think that we are in that moment. And for that moment, we need to talk about it, because grief is something that doesn't follow a timeline. It doesn't come with a manual that we know that, okay, we are at that step and this is how we are going to move forward. It's extremely messy, it's extremely chaotic, it's raw, it's deeply human, and it differs from person to person. But even at a rock bottom, even in the hardest moment, there is always a way forward, no matter how small step that we have to take, but there is always a way forward. So if you are grieving, if you know that someone is grieving, in order to support them, do nothing, just stay present and know that it is okay not to be okay. It is okay to feel whatever you are feeling. There is not any right way, there is not any wrong way. There is nothing wrong in asking for help. There is nothing wrong to take your time, as long as you are being kind to yourself, as long as you are kind to the people around you. So learned pretty much a lot about this session, and I hope everyone out there would have learned a lot. We'll definitely be coming back with more discussion, with more topic. If anyone has an option, feel free to reach out to us. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others. Until the next episode, bye bye.